Hi, Viji. Welcome to IWD 2020. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Dikshita. It's really been a pleasure being here.
So, Viji, can you tell us about your journey into deep learning?
Sure. Before I go there, I just wanted to take a minute and thank the organizers of this IWD session. You guys have been awesome, very well organized. It's quite amazing that you're pulled through an online conference. It requires incredible amount of planning. So I thank Lakshya, you, and all the people backstage who made this, go through seamlessly. So with that, let me start off. I actually started off in traditional tech about in the late 90s with ERP. And, we had just moved to the US and I started to work as a PeopleSoft systems engineer. And over the next several years, over a decade and a half, 15 years, I began to work on various aspects of IT. And when I left the US, I was the director of IT, managing a team of over 100, both in our office in Chicago and our back office in Pune, which I helped captive back office in Pune, which I helped set up. So we moved back to India for family reasons, and at that point, it was time for me to take a pause and think about how I wanted to proceed. So for various reasons, I decided to actually jump into the new technology that was just beginning to emerge in the public domain, which was in data science at that point. So I started off with doing Johns Hopkins online data science specialization, although at that point it was not called a specialization. I started off working, going through Coursera and doing that course. Roger Peng is an excellent prof. I learned a lot. And it just got me really curious about the topic because I was naturally interested in math, and it added to that. So soon I found myself doing Andrew's machine learning course, which is the Bible of machine learning in many ways. And then I started to work on deep learning specialization. I was also chosen to be a mentor on one of the courses for Andrew's deep learning specialization. And all along this, as I was learning, I was also working with a number of startups in India and abroad. So it gave me a wide exposure to this topic, but I began to specialize specifically in computer vision.
That's really interesting. Can you tell us about the type of work that you do?
Sure. Yeah. So initially, when I started to do these courses and work at startups, I did a lot of hands-on work, right? So like the session you've been seeing on Colab, I was actually working hands-on as a developer because I really wanted to get into the nitty-gritties of how this technology works. Although I hadn't been a coder for maybe 15 years, I decided to jump in and actually start coding and learn this technology ground up. So after I got, I worked on several projects, hands-on, both with respect to the algorithms for deep learning or machine learning, and also with respect to various cloud platforms, whether it be Google's Colab or Google Cloud Platform or Floyd Hub initially or early on, or AWS. Then I began to feel a lot more confident to be able to take a look at this entire technology from, like, say, 30,000 feet and actually start to plan out projects. So currently, the kind of work I do is much more, I'm not able to get into the specifics of the projects because a number of them are covered under non-disclosure agreements, and some of them are in stealth mode. But in general, the kind of work I do is much more planning based. So where I look at the business problem and see what kind of say deep computer vision, firstly, does computer vision even solve that business problem? What are the other options we have? And then once we choose to actually implement this technology, Then there are a number of other questions that come up. Firstly, do we have enough data? Where is the data? Is it in the public domain? Can we, utilize vast amounts of public domain related data? Or do we need to actually look in-house and see if we have labeled data by any chance? And if we don't have either, there is no public domain label data available, nor is it available in-house, then we need to look into labeling this kind of data. And then the question arises, especially say for medical images, labeling is not something a layperson can do. It requires a specialized skill. So then that's another thing, right? What kind of skill set is required to label this data? And then you start to build the data pipeline, the algorithms that are required, the cloud platform, the training that goes behind this. And then it's a very iterative cycle. So, what exactly are you going to measure as, what is your measure for accuracy for the model, right? So for example, for COVID testing, the specificity and sensitivity become really important. So those kind of questions come up. And finally, we have to put this all together to make sure that this is a technology that can be given to the end customer to use in whatever format that might be. It might be in the form of a mobile app. It could be, embedded into, say, robotics. It could be given in as a, on the edge. This could be something that could work on the edge. So these are all questions that need to be answered. And then, so it has to be integrated into other technologies so that an overall solution can be offered to the customer. So I'm more in that space right now in the overall design and looking at the problem domain and trying to see which technology can address that problem domain and how it can be implemented.
And what would be the type of challenges that startups would face when they wish to bring the power of AI to business?
Sure. So this is actually a really important question because there was a recent study in, I think, October last year that was done by MIT Sloan BCG Group. And they interviewed 2,500 executives from various companies. And although 9 out of 10 executives said that AI was a very, very important technology, and from both from a strategic point of view, from their future, but also as a risk that if they did not implement it, their competitor might implement it and have a competitive edge. So although this was the basis on which they had begun their AI implementations, it was really surprising that even after significant investments in AI, about 4 out of 10 companies had said that they had found no benefit after implementing AI to their business. And so then the question arises, why is this the case, right? So why are 4 out of 10 companies that have invested significantly in AI not seeing the benefits of AI? And so this goes to the primary challenges with implementing AI. So a lot of people think that AI is all about the technology, the algorithms, but actually there are many things that need to fall in place for AI to really work. So the first thing to think about is, as I mentioned, you need to look at the business problem and see whether your solution is going to address that business problem, or there are other options out there. And what are those options? Why does your solution have the competitive edge? You need to be able to answer that question really honestly. Now, after you have answered the question and you're convinced that, let's say, a deep learning solution is a solution to that problem or that opportunity, then the next thing to address is, do you have the right team? So many a time, it is thought that just data scientists are sufficient to run an AI project, and that is definitely not the case. I can tell you from experience that you need to think about data scientists for sure, but you also need to think about who is going to label your data. You need to think about how is your data going to fit into the overall solution. So whether do you need full stack developers, and you definitely need your DevOps guys, DevOps team, but who can work with cloud technology, because as we know, deep learning is really resource heavy and a lot of it runs on the cloud. So you need DevOps teams that can actually implement this on the cloud. And finally, least but it is definitely necessary to have a business analyst who can understand the business problem and see how to implement the AI solution to address that customers' needs. And if you don't do that bit, if you're not constantly looking at what the customer needs and checking how your solution is going to benefit that customer, then everything that you've built is actually to waste. And the other thing to point out is many a time you'll find that there are some really puzzling questions that come up while you do such an implementation. And so it's really helpful to have a PhD type of resource who's worked on, say, deep neural networks or computer vision specifically, to have handy to act as a resource to guide the project. So when the entire team, whether it is played by one people or multiple people, it is necessary that we have all these skill sets on the project for it to be successful. So you have, you're looking at the people, you're looking at data. So with respects to data, the important thing to remember is you need to think about whether you have the right data to address the problem. Is your data representative of the population out there? Are you missing certain use cases in your data? Is your data current? How are you going to keep your data current, right? So what is the process that you're going to have to continue to train your models so that once they're deployed and you're getting fresh data out from the field, how are you going to train your models and keep them up to date so that they can handle new situations? And once you have your people, your process, your data, and you've addressed the business problem, then finally you need to think about whether you have the budget to run all this. Deep learning is not an easy, not a cheap solution. So you definitely need to think about and plan for the budget. Are you funded enough to run such a solution? So when all of this come together, then and only then can you have a successful project. So this is something that startups definitely need to keep in mind.
Talking about the team, do you feel that more women should get into AI?
Absolutely. So I was just looking at some statistics. There are, I think, only about 22% women in. So if you look at the overall AI, workforce, only 22% are women. So you would say, why does this matter, right? So let me quote you a study by an economist called Richard Freeman from Harvard University. He studied about 1.5 million scientific papers that were put out over a 15-year period. And what he found was that the papers that were written by very diverse teams actually were quoted a lot more than papers that were written by very homogeneous teams. So that shows that there is something to diversity and creativity, or diversity and the success of your paper. Now, this is just one study, but there have been a number of studies by McKinsey, by Northwestern, by a number of other groups that have shown that over and over again that it is extremely important to have diverse teams for your solution to be applicable in the marketplace. So whether if you want a very innovative product, you must have a diverse team. So the other thing to point out is that what happens when you don't have a diverse team. So some of the risks that you run into are you have groupthink. So the entire team thinks in one way, and nobody even questions that thought process because everybody is thinking the same way. So everybody is very homogeneous in their thought process, and what that could lead to is things like bias. So we in the session we just saw, there's something called as the machine learning bias, but there's also a real bias that happens in the real world with deep learning products and machine learning, for that matter of fact. So a classic example is where face recognition technology does not recognize women of color, for example, right? And this has, or home loans are denied to minorities, for example. So there are several such cases that have come up where machine learning or deep learning has been used in the industry for a certain purpose, and then they found this, bias that had crept into the this solution. And the reason is that probably the data that was selected for training these models did not have enough diversity. I also think that the teams that built these products were not diverse enough because nobody ever questioned it. Nobody said, hey, let me try it out on me and see whether it works, right? So because nobody questioned it, it went out all the way out to the market without anybody noticing that there was an issue. So that's the issue of not having diversity teams. The other issue is, and a really important one, is ethics in AI. So there are, ethics can fall under, two different categories. One is in the large scale. So if you look at AI, it's expected to really, maybe replace a number of jobs, and what does it do to the people whom it replaces? So those are the kind of ethical questions that come up. But also, there are really pressing ethical problems when it comes to AI. For example, privacy. So when you have face recognition software, for example, what does it do to your privacy? What if you are a minority in the, and your AI software doesn't recognize you, or you get categorized in a certain set because of the way it works? So these are really ethical questions that come up that have to be addressed. And unfortunately, many a times, because the teams are not diverse enough, these questions don't come up until very late in the project. And at that point, some tweaks are made maybe, and the product is released to the market. But these questions should actually be addressed right up front and thought through right from the beginning of the project. And this is the reason why it's really, really important that we have, women and actually, diverse team members. I'm not just saying women, but diverse team members be involved in AI projects from the beginning and not just towards the end. So I would really encourage women who are watching this to really think about how they can, contribute to this AI space. There's a lot to learn, and it's a fascinating and emerging technology. And it's important that we have. I really hope that in the next decade or so at least, we are at 50%, and we have an equal representation of women in this workspace.
Thank you so much, Viji. In your profile, you mentioned AI for social good. Could you talk about what you're doing?
Sure, yeah. So I've always been interested in AI for social good. Last year, I worked with Google.org and DataKind, where Google.org wanted to give out $2.5 million to grant in the AI space. And I worked with a number of other such volunteers to evaluate proposals that were submitted from around the world, which were in climate change or representing minorities or disabilities or many other such interesting areas. So that was an interesting experience. And just from about 10 days ago, I've started to volunteer for endcoronanow.org. And under this consortium, there's a Zero Base Foundation, which is really focused on making sure that COVID tracing addresses the privacy concerns of people and also addresses people who do not have a smartphone. A number of contact tracing applications out there rely on smartphone technology, whether it's Bluetooth or GPS. And as we know in India and number of emerging countries, world, the smartphone penetration is not very high. So given this, we do need other solutions that complement the existing products. And Zero Base Foundation has a fascinating solution in this to address this issue. And where machine learning comes in as a plan is to have all this data come into a central source where machine learning models will be used on these to inform public health officials about how the virus is spreading through communities and alert them so that they can be prepared for the spread of the virus and how to contain it. So it's fascinating, and I'm hoping that we can do some real work to save lives in that area.
That's really interesting, Viji. On a general note, what is your one advice or one tech lesson or principle that has passed all tests of time?
Sure, yeah. So, to me, I think that the most important thing is that we don't, as technologists, we don't just build technology for technology's sake. I think that's really, really important that whatever the technology may be, looking at the end customer and seeing what the business need is and understand that, building technology that suits the need. So this could be achieved by asking the five whys or different techniques that we could do. And also, it's really important that if you work in a large organization where you're far removed from the customer, that you make connects with people who are in touch with the customer. So this could be people in your support team, in your sales team. It's really important that you network with them, and because this will allow you to understand what they are hearing from the customer's point of view and get early feedback or understanding of how your technology, what you're building, can really benefit the customer. So this is my one advice, whether it is an AI or any other tech space, that we as technologists need to really be in front of the customer in any way we can.
Thank you so much, Viji, for joining us for this quick fireside chat today. Indeed, an honor having you with us.
Thank you, Dikshita. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. To all our viewers here, I hope you have been enjoying the sessions so far. Allow me to have the honors and privilege to introduce